Hello and welcome to another modeling video. This is Alan from the Mokei at YouTube reviewing the Fujimi 176 Type 1 Honi tank destroyer, Imperial Japan from the Second World War and Sino-Pacific conflicts. With an older tooling, newer print in a classic style box, we're presented with 3 runners, rubber tracks and fresh water slide decals with a large printed instruction sheet dictating the scheme, bit of information and specs, parts breakdown and instructions how to build in a fairly easy to follow format. The tracks are a non-solvent rubber, the runners are styrene tanned plastic with a slight amount of flash in the corner of some sections. The majority of the moulding is very crisp, clean and easy to work with. Straight out of the gate, everything is directly molded with no sliding functionality. We're going to have to assemble the hull, then stick all the suspension and wheels together. A very tedious and long-running process, though nothing too hard. There is no evidence of warpage or issues with the plastic, and it quite easily takes to Tamiya cement and sticks together quite flush. I found there was minimal gaps, with only the front and back of the hull needing a little bit of cement. The pegs for the wheel assembly is dyed in the correct directions that needs to go together and slots in with a little bit of glue to be suggestive. It is fairly weak to hold onto and suggested to allow some time to fully dry and harden before attempting to stick on the rubber tracks. One thing that I have struggled and many have mentioned over the years is I sometimes don't align the wheels to the best of my ability. I stuck them all together and leaned them on a flat surface to dry, though it still wasn't absolutely perfect. After 24 hours, I sanded the putty and moved on. A big shout out and thank you to my good friend Berjo, who visited me on New Year's and gifted me this for Christmas last year with a promise to build and present on the channel. The wheels was firm enough that I was able to apply the rubber tracks and super glue it down across all the different wheels, allowing segments to dry and snap on. As that was occurring, the rest of the detail and field gun armor started sub-assembling, sanding the sides of the barrel not to flatten it. All of these processes were very straightforward and not too difficult. Moving forward, after the top of the hull was glued into place, we started to hit a few headaches and issues. The instructions were a bit vague, with a bit too much detailed cluttered on in exactly where the pegs and each component snap on, and I believe I may have put the field gun a little too forward, which messed up the sub-assembly and slotting where all the armor components went. This was a colossal mistake, but not too difficult, where I was able to wear away at some parts of the armor and permanently glue it down with a noticeable gap. This all looked fairly straightforward and ideal together in its design, and ample amount of dissolve putty placed in all the slots and the surface to make it into one piece. This was allowed to dry and sand. It did not look like an issue or anything too grossly out of place from said mistake. Regardless, proportions look spot on, the tracks were okay, hard to work with, a few figures were thrown in for free. Moving on to painting, I made up a batch of automotive filler primer mixed with automotive lacquer thinner, applied it through a 0.3mm airbrush and slowly dusted it on in 2 to 3 coats in various sections without any issue. The gluing together was quite effective and found no faults or gaps, which is quite surprisingly with the issues I came across. Looking at the box art and reference material, I love that multi-camouflage look with light shading throughout. This is a bit tricky and complex. Pulling out my Imperial Japanese paint set and a few extra colours, laid a 3-shade tone for about the 4 or 5 various schemes. Reaching to some liquid mask, my preference is always the RC graded stuff, would stipple on a camouflage pattern as thick as humanly possible. This way multiple layers of paint can build up and I can find the edges and peel it away. Allowing that to dry, then I was able to go with each coat of the various colours to build up the scheme. I could see the pattern underneath, allowed the paint to dry and put another layer on. For each layer would take about 2 to 3 days, include hardening, and this stretched out to a few weeks to layer each scheme to have a final build up of a mess of dried latex and lumps all over the place. Not very convincing and exciting, but once I removed everything with a soft toothpick and any debris with blue tack, the scheme came out quite nice and convincing. Hand painting resumed by first covering the tank tracks in an oxidized metal custom mix, the rubber around each individual wheel, and finally extra detail like the exhaust, stowage and a few bits and pieces. In the airbrushing, I was tactical to make sure the bottom was green, which would have been the first layer, and the final layer being tan, which is the color of the internal compartment. That was over the need of spraying colors for light pigment to dark pigment. Once everything dried, I made a batch of Panaline ink and sludge washed everything across the wheels, detail, and dabbed up any excess. This helped provide definition and break up the shape and profile, plus the wheels and tracks. It left a glossy sheen, which is perfect for the decals. I cut out what was ideal on the box art, added a little water in the tiny cup, picking up with a knife and sliding it straight on the surface. These decals were insanely thin. I only soaked for about 30-40 seconds and they were on the cusp of tearing. After another 24 hours of drying and setting, I hit everything with rough Mr. Hobby matte base to give a bit of texture for pigment and weathering pencils. The weathering pencil brought out the edges to give borders to all these colors, and slapped on a bit of a tan pigment and each layer of clear flat base to affix it and make more bite for another build-up of tan pigment. This isn't my first rodeo regarding Fujimi, remembering I did a Panzer 1 or 2. I also remember the decals were quite atrocious on that, but everything else came out. Proportions are great, the details is nice and subtle for its scale. All the little rivets to stowage and panels are appropriate for airbrushing. This would be a lot easier to hand paint, however, with this more complex scheme, but I'm just very happy how this pops at the various angles you look around. Had quite a bit of fun. This should not be too difficult to assemble if you take extra care, from beginners to anyone seasoned or experienced. I think there is something here, though if you're a fan and a collector of Imperial Japanese armor, it's almost essential to pick up and enjoy. My efforts is not too bad. It's got the right amount of gritty shades of color and finish that I'd expect from any of my 72nd kits. My choices of mediums and processes did slow down this build quite a bit. Super glue would have made it so this could be built in one day, hand painting it in another day. The finish would still be quite acceptable. Regardless, good kit. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, until next time, stay tuned for further content. Check out the description section down below for references and social medias. We'll catch you guys next time. See you later.